Impact Teams Radio. Welcome to Impact Teams Radio, the show where we explore what it takes to be a leader of the leaders in corporate America. Get ready to be inspired and discover proven tips for going from average to exceptional. Now, here's your host and guide, Tony Sherman.
Hello, and welcome back to Impact Teams Radio. This is Tony Sherman, your host and guide with Impact Teams Radio, the radio show designed to help you to be a more effective and a more insightful leader in corporate America today. Our show helps you focus on the exceptional people that succeed in corporate America, to learn from the best of the best, and for you to take away tactics and strategies that you can start to implement in the next 6 months in your life to make you a better leader and to put a firmer foundation under your growth. And today I'm really excited because we have a return guest here. A couple of weeks back we had Tim Parker, and Tim has decided to grace us again and come back, and we're going to talk about the changing face of leadership in the 21st century. And Tim is going to look back over the arc of his career and with his experience as an in-depth consultant to leading companies and give us some insights into what we need to do to be effective leaders in this fast-moving pace in the 21st century. So, Tim, welcome back.
Well, thank you very much, Tony. Thanks for asking me back.
My pleasure. So, Tim, you're a leadership expert, and that's where you really focus your attention. You intimated when we first started talking that leadership was more important than it used to be. That doesn't seem sensible on the surface of it. Why would you think that leadership is more important today than it was, say, 30 years ago?
Well, if you look back over the past several decades, the business world and the leadership in the role of leadership has morphed from what it used to be. 100 years ago, when organizations were first being developed, they were really patterned after two large groups, which were the only two large groups there. One was the railroads that were just being developed, and the Army. So the leadership pattern was the command and control. Part of that was because the knowledge base was at the top. The few leaders that were at the top. So there wasn't much leadership going on. It was more direction. Guys, go and do this. This is the strategy. This is the tactics. So there wasn't a lot of thinking going on below top or middle management. Over the years, with the development of the organization, which probably occurred over the next 50 years, from 1914, 1910 to around 1960, Peter Drucker got involved with the study of large corporations, GM, IBM, that sort of thing, and developed models, or at least a philosophy, of what we now call modern management. So in his view, the organization developed a middle management type system, and it has been adopted sort of along the lines of what we see today, but it has changed over that period of time to the point where we have now evolved beyond the typical organization, and now the large organization is sort of being subsumed by what Peter Drucker called the knowledge worker. It used to be where the plumbers and the carpenters and all that stuff, they carried their tools, but they needed the company to go to work. Nowadays, the worker has changed, organizations have changed, where the knowledge is, or the worker, their skill set is in their heads. So a manager or a leader, where it used to be the senior plumber of the shop ran the shop. Well, now that's not the case. Not the most senior guy or person or gal can or should be running the shop. It is the brightest person. The leader is not necessarily the all-knowing leader now. It is morphed to be more of a manager or a leader of equals. So the knowledge base has drifted from the top more or less down to the bottom to the middle, which creates a huge dynamic change.
I understand exactly what you're saying, because I was very fortunate to come into the workforce just as that sea change was happening. I started off in software and hardware development on the IT side, and I was a strong B+ developer. I definitely wasn't an A developer. Mm-hmm. And there's a huge difference in software coding between a B developer and an A developer. They're not a bit better than you. They're orders of magnitude better than you. But I was a better manager. And I just came in where the cultural change was you didn't necessarily take your best people and make them the manager. You took the person who was best suited for management and let your best people do what they were really good at and become the real craftsmen in their craft. And I think I would have had a lot less of a successful career if that sea change hadn't happened, because I was mediocre at my technical skill. Although I loved it dearly, I'm just not a good coder. I since went on and became heavily involved in network and security, and those are technical areas I am good at and I do enjoy thoroughly. But I think that difference of you don't necessarily promote the strongest technical person or the strongest craftsperson. You promote the person with the management and leadership acumen, and let the people who are really good at what they do get on with what they do.
Oh, and I think you're absolutely right. Now the part that's dragging that with businesses, the folks that are at the top are probably the more senior folks, which means they still have the mindset of a decade or two decades ago. So they're still trying to bring in the most qualified or the highest level technicians or technical people to be part of the leadership team, and that's not necessarily just as you said, not necessarily the best thing to do. They have to know enough technical stuff to be able to raise the DS flag and say, no, guys, that's not what we're after. But their skill set should not be so much technical, but a lot more so on the leadership side, be able to influence the team to come to the right solution.
Right. And actually, that probably speaks to the core of what you were talking about before, because I remember, again, as I started in my 20s to start to develop my career, Six Sigma and all of that with the process improvement was all the rage. But as you move into a knowledge engineering environment with knowledge workers, good solid processes are good for everybody. I'm not denying that. But Six Sigma and that thrust begins to break down because it doesn't really apply to a knowledge worker. True
to a point, and that's a good point about Six Sigma, and that's sort of the difference between leadership and management. Six Sigma is a process improvement tool. There's a total quality management type stuff that I've been exposed to. In fact, my brother is very, very heavily involved in Six Sigma, Lean Six Sigma. But those are focused on the technical or the process aspects. And if you look at any corporation or any organization, you can think of it in three or four components. One is the infrastructure, then there's the technology, then there's the processes. But all three of those are driven by the fourth component, which is the people. So if the people are well led, the other three will follow. So it takes the leadership to understand that it's the people that's the key to success, not necessarily the other three. And I think it moves from, as I think you've intimated a few times, it moves from a command and control perspective to an influence perspective, maybe? Is that the right way to put it? I think that is the right way to put it. Again, back 100 years or so, the only big organizations to model or pattern your organization after was the Army and the railroads, which were structured sort of based on the Army, which is very command and control, because the people that you were instructing didn't have the same level of knowledge that you had or any knowledge necessarily. In the early manufacturing days, the engineers who created the machines were the guys who were in charge. They're the ones that managed the staff only because they knew the machine so well. It's the engineers who were trying to do the leadership part. And eventually that evolved to what we have today, to where everybody is a knowledgeable engineer sort of type person. So one can't lead the others. The best they can do is influence and create the purpose behind what they're trying to do. So it's really, leadership is a means to influence others and to adjust their attitudes, which is different than manipulation, because sometimes leadership gets tied with that word, and it's not quite meant to be the same thing. It's really an attitude adjustment more so than trying to do something evil like manipulation.
Yes, and I think a good leader has to have like the Mao Zedong approach, where when he does a great job, the people say we did it ourselves. You have to be willing to fade in the background and let the strongest people on your team take the lead or take the public face, if you will, if you're going to succeed. You don't need to be the front person all the time these days.
True, but there's a caveat to that, if I can. Part of that sort of depends on what sort of organization you're in. Purpose is always a key factor, but a purpose in one organization may be different than a purpose in another. A good example is the U.S. Marine Corps does a marvelous job of establishing the purpose for which they exist. So to get people to charge the hill and take the bullet and that sort of thing, they sort of mold the Marines to think that this is a really important thing to do, but their leadership style is more of a directive model, more so than an influence model. I guess you could say direction is sort of a type of influence, but it's more focused. It's almost command and control. So my point in saying all that is the situation may dictate something different each time. Another example would be a fire station where during a fire, the fire chief would take a command and control point of view, which would be appropriate for the purpose. Once they're back in the firehouse, then that point of view and that leadership style would need to change to a different style to keep the firemen engaged, if that makes sense.
It does, yes. My son's a Marine, and I remember when I went to watching him pass out of boot camp, Paris Island, that was it.
Yes.
When he was in Paris Island. It showed that the boot camp knew exactly what their mission was. Because as you go in, across the gates, it says, "We make Marines." And it's like, our sole purpose is to take young men in and spit out Marines. So they had a very defined purpose. And Daniel will definitely agree with you that the Marines have a command and control structure.
Oh, yes, they do. But it serves their purpose well. But every Marine, and as your son will tell you, there are no ex-Marines. You might have a former Marine, but there will never be an ex-Marine. But they serve a purpose of duty, honor, country, and that sort of thing. So they're absolutely focused. But they need a different leadership style to do the things that they do. And please pass my thanks to your son for serving the country in that way.
Thank you very much, Tim. But why I said that was I've seen a couple of programs. This is mainly in England, but I'm sure it happens in America as well, where you see competition between, say, even two military forces. And I love it when you watch the officer step back and allow a senior corporal or a senior sergeant take control in an area, and he becomes part of a team member. And it really struck me. I was a young man at the time, first time I ever saw this happen. And I grew up in the military. My dad was a career military person. And the person interviewing the officer afterwards said, "Well, why weren't you in control at that point?" He says, "I was, but the sergeant knew more than I did then. So I had to let him tell us how to get over it, because otherwise we'd have lost time." And I thought that always struck me as a good model of leadership, knowing that you're in control well enough to let other people take the lead and shape the engagement.
I think that's a great story. And, I think last time we spoke, I talked about the book called Drive by Dan Pink.
Yes, you did. Yes.
Yeah, and in that book, he talks about purpose, mastery, and autonomy. And what that corporal was learning how to master his skill, and that officer was delegating down to him so that he could master what he was supposed to be doing. It also gave him some sort of sense of confidence, and that officer trusted that corporal to do what he's supposed to do. There are too many times when the senior people feel like they have to give all the direction and not allow their staff to do what they're trained to do well. I think that was a brilliant example of proper delegation. Yes,
it was. And in fact, the funny thing is, not if you do that, you grow the leadership capacity within your team, and you avoid burnout for yourself. It truly is a win-win.
Oh, absolutely.
So if for young leaders who are listening to this, who are looking at how they're going to progress their career, what kind of lessons should they take away in terms of improving their leadership capacity and the leadership capacity of the companies that they're with?
Broad question. One of the things that I learned in my career was what leadership actually was. So that takes quite an endeavor to understand the different views. There are styles, there are charismatic leadership, there are different versions. One of the things that's come to the forefront in the past decade or so is something called emotional intelligence. And what that has to do with is how a leader conveys his emotions outwardly and how it's received by the listener, by the follower. So the leader needs to understand how he's demonstrating his expertise, and then perceiving how the listener hears it. And that dynamic is, it sounds simple, but it's not as simple as you might think, because people, what they see and what is actually perceived are typically two different things. So it's knowing how to do that well. So if a company is out looking for leaders, someone who can be effective, that's one of the measures that I think that they ought to measure, is how well can people relate to others in a realistic fashion. There's a bunch of ways of looking at leadership. There's probably 10,000 different theories, but can one theory apply to all circumstances? Probably not. That's the term they call situational leadership. So the situation and the environment and the culture will dictate the appropriate leadership approach, and that's probably a better term versus style, because there are 10 or 12 different styles.
Right. So effectively, what you're saying is one of the key, or a couple of the key components for a young leader to develop is, one, their emotional intelligence, I think is the phrase you used, and the other one is their situational intelligence.
Absolutely.
Knowing how to assess the situation and knowing how to effectively read the responses.
True, and then using the appropriate leadership style, or whatever you want to call it, because you're very much like the fire chief. His style or his approach to leadership during an emergency situation is going to be far different. It's going to be more of command and control, as opposed to back in the firehouse where they're putting the hoses up and they're getting ready for the next fire. That's a whole different leadership style. So
yeah, and I was going to say, I mean, I've been involved in projects where you have a more collaborative style and the team is moving things forward. Suddenly something comes down from the customer senior management, and the project team for a season goes into command and control, because you've effectively got an escalation. You have to get over that. Once you've got over that and you found out what the root cause was and you're moving forward again, you can relax and allow the team to be more collaborative, if you will.
Absolutely.
Yep. So we've actually run out of time, but I really would like to just step back and ask you a few personal questions, like, what kind of books do you read? Do you have a favorite book?
Well, I have a ton of books that I've read. I love to read Peter Drucker, but the book that started me out on this journey was when I was a kid, probably about 10 years old, and my father was a salesman. He could sell snow to a Eskimo, and he gave me a book by Dale Carnegie. I know it sounds silly, but it's How to Win Friends and Influence People. Beautiful book about how to influence others for a given purpose. Now, that was more focused on sales, but it led me to think about, doing business is not all about me. It's about how the other person thinks, what they believe, what's important to them. So it's not me, it's them. They're the important ones. Great book.
Yeah, and actually, two points on that. One, your whole both episodes that we've done together, you've definitely had that as the underlying plank of what that you've been going on about. It's about the other person, but also, I know it's a dated book in terms of when it's come out, but every couple of months I will hear someone still recommend that.
Oh, sure, yeah.
It's an evergreen book, really, in terms of personal development.
Yeah, it is. It's great.
So what about with the power of the internet? We have access to so many good things. You and I spoke on the last episode about TED Talks, but do you have like an internet tool that you recommend for people?
One of the things that I love to listen to is the HBR, which is Harvard Business Review. I know your listeners know what that is, but it's the HBR IdeaCast. They're about a 15-minute, almost the length of a TED Talk, but it talks about different aspects about leadership, about business, about what's important, that sort of thing. So that's something you can download to your phone or listen to on the computer, and it gives you an insight about what's going on, in the current business world by people who are pretty well knowledgeable about that kind of thing.
Actually, Tim, I'd never heard of it. I've just jotted something down, and hopefully it's got an RSS feed, and I'll put it in my podcast reader.
Oh, yeah.
So I can listen to it. So, yeah, thank you very much for that. Okay, so as we wrap up, as we finish this, Tim, have you got one key thing that you think listeners could embed into their lives that would help them succeed in corporate America?
I do. I listened to or read a lot of books by a guy named Marshall Goldsmith, who's a PhD organizational psychologist, and he also has a couple of YouTubes out there. And his website, I'm not sure what the name of his website is, but if you Google Marshall Goldsmith, you'll come up with his website, and it has all these free things that you can read. But his focus is, one of the things that he did a video on is he interviewed some retired CEOs, like 20 or 30 of them. And the one thing that he picked out of that interview is what all those CEOs wanted and should have been focused on was not the corner office, not making all this money, but they should have been focused on being happy in the moment. So that's what I would recommend is just don't worry about making tons of money or, even though you have to make some to survive and feed the family and all that stuff, yeah, I understand that, but you need to focus on what's important now. Is it family or money? But let's be happy now and don't chase money and don't chase the corner office.
Actually, if you think about it, if you're truly happy now, your leadership affection quotient goes up, and you'll probably end up getting the corner office. Andrew Moore, a previous guest we had, he shared a term that he'd got from the Marines, which is slow is steady and steady is fast. And that be happy now sort of resonates with that slow is steady, steady is fast. I can see that it would be an effective way to improve your leadership quotient, if you will.
Very good point.
So, Tim, thank you so much for being a guest on Impact Teams Radio.
Oh, you're more than welcome. Thank you for asking again.
And Impact Nation, if you want to find out more about Tim, you can find Tim Parker at parkerresourcesmanagement.com. Check out the website. And until next week, this is Tony Sherman, your host and guide. Have a great week and put some of these lessons into your life. Bye for now.
That's it for this week. Thank you for listening. Now go and apply these few gems. Make the wisdom you have heard your own. If you want to be part of our launch success, then please go to impactteamsradio.com/love and tell the world. If you want more and never want to miss a beat, please go to impactteamsradio.com/subscribe. If you have 3 minutes, we would love to see a positive review on iTunes. And until next time, remember to act on what you've learned, and you'll be ahead of most of the world. Impact Teams Radio.